Imagine this: you're sitting in a crowded cafe, surrounded by dozens of people engaged in animated conversations. Words fly back and forth, opinions about politics, heated debates about the latest news, confident assertions about how the world should be. The noise is constant, relentless. Everyone seems to know something. Everyone has a position. Everyone is thinking, or so it appears. But here's what strikes you as you sit there, observing: not a single person has paused. Not one has fallen silent mid-sentence to genuinely consider what they're saying. The conversations aren't explorations, they're performances. Rehearsed positions colliding with rehearsed counterpositions. Borrowed phrases. Recycled arguments. Thoughts that don't belong to anyone in particular but to everyone collectively, passed around like currency that's lost its value through endless circulation. A world where opinions are loud, information is abundant, but genuine understanding is rare. In this video, we will explore the highest levels of thought and why modern society seems trapped in shallow thinking. And pay close attention, because the final insight revealed later is the most important and transformative of all, one that can fundamentally change how you perceive yourself, others, and reality itself. We live in an era of unprecedented access to information. Knowledge is everywhere, constantly flowing through screens, conversations, and endless streams of content. Yet, paradoxically, depth of thought has become increasingly rare. Philosophers, psychologists, and thinkers across history warn that when thinking becomes superficial, human potential is quietly suffocated. This is not just an intellectual problem. It is an existential one. The quality of your thinking determines the quality of your life. Before we go deeper, take a moment to support this journey. If this exploration resonates with you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, share this video, and comment your reflections below. What you are about to hear may challenge your assumptions and reveal patterns of thinking you did not even realize were controlling you. At the most basic level, shallow thinking is reactive. It operates on impulse, emotion, and borrowed opinions. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman described this as fast thinking, a mode driven by automatic responses and mental shortcuts. While useful for survival, this level of thought dominates far too much of modern life. Social media outrage, ideological tribalism, and constant distraction all thrive here. You realize something unsettling as you observe the cafe around you: they're not thinking. They're remembering. Remembering what they heard someone else say. Remembering what fits their identity. Remembering what keeps them safe within their chosen tribe. The machinery of their minds is running at full speed, generating tremendous activity, but producing almost no genuine thought. And then the most disturbing question arrives: are you any different? When was the last time you had a thought that genuinely surprised you? When did you last follow an idea so deep into unfamiliar territory that you emerged fundamentally changed? Not when did you last learn a new fact: facts are cheap, abundant, forgettable. When did you last think in a way that challenged the very architecture of your understanding? Most people go their entire lives without experiencing this even once. They navigate existence using an inherited map, never realizing they could draw their own. They operate sophisticated belief systems they didn't construct and can't explain. Ask them why they believe what they believe, and watch the discomfort spread across their face as they search for reasons that were never actually there. This is the great paradox of our age: we live in the most information-rich period in human history, yet we are starving for genuine understanding. We have access to humanity's entire accumulated knowledge in our pockets, yet most people's thoughts barely scratch the surface of what's possible. We pride ourselves on being educated, informed, connected, while remaining utterly disconnected from the deeper currents of consciousness that separate true thinking from mere mental activity. Society calls this progress. It isn't. It's a carefully constructed illusion that serves a specific purpose: to keep the mind perpetually occupied while preventing it from ever going deep enough to become dangerous. Dangerous to what? To the systems that depend on predictability. To the narratives that require unquestioning acceptance. To the entire architecture of modern life that functions smoothly only when people don't look too closely at what they're doing or why. Shallow thinking isn't a personal failure. It's a design feature. And you've been living inside this design your whole life, mistaking its limitations for the boundaries of possibility itself. But what if you could see beyond it? What if there were levels of thought so profound that reaching them would fundamentally alter not just what you understand, but who you are? What if the difference between shallow thinking and deep thinking isn't merely a matter of degree, but of kind, an entirely different mode of consciousness that most people never access because they don't know it exists? The question isn't whether you're capable of reaching these depths. You are. The question is whether you're willing to abandon the comfortable shallows where most of human society has agreed to remain, treading water together, never realizing there's solid ground beneath if only they'd dare to dive. What you're about to discover will make you uncomfortable. It should. Because the deepest levels of thought require confronting truths about yourself and the world that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. But on the other side of that discomfort lies something most people only glimpse in fleeting moments: genuine clarity. Authentic understanding. The rare and precious experience of thinking that's actually yours. The journey begins with a single recognition: you don't know how shallow you've been going. None of us do. Until we go deeper. The trap was set long before you were born. It wasn't designed by a single architect or implemented through conspiracy. It emerged organically from systems that discovered something useful: predictable minds are manageable minds. And the most effective way to ensure predictability is to prevent depth from ever taking root. Consider your education. From the earliest years, you were trained not to think but to perform. The classroom rewarded speed over contemplation, correct answers over meaningful questions. Tests measured your ability to recall and reproduce, never your capacity to genuinely understand. You learned that thinking had a clock attached to it, that hesitation was failure, that uncertainty was something to hide rather than explore. Carl Jung observed that people don't actually want truth, they want certainty. Shallow thinking provides this comfort. It offers clean categories, simple explanations, and the reassuring feeling that you understand what's happening around you. Deep thinking, by contrast, introduces friction. It reveals contradictions in your beliefs. It exposes the borrowed nature of your opinions. It forces you to confront the unsettling reality that much of what you've accepted as truth is merely inherited narrative. This is why society unconsciously but systematically discourages depth. Not through explicit prohibition, but through relentless incentive structures that make shallow thinking the path of least resistance. Quick takes are rewarded with likes and shares. Nuanced positions are punished with accusations of fence-sitting. Complex analysis is dismissed as overthinking. The message is clear: don't go too deep, or you'll be left behind. The philosopher Martin Heidegger warned of this exact trap. He argued that modern technological society reduces everything, including human beings, to resources to be optimized for efficiency. When thinking itself becomes a productivity metric, depth becomes a liability. Contemplation looks like laziness. Silence appears as disengagement. Doubt registers as incompetence. But there's something deeper still, something more psychological than societal. Friedrich Nietzsche understood it well: most people avoid deep thinking because it demands courage they don't possess. To think deeply is to question everything, including the foundations of your identity. It means confronting the possibility that you've been wrong about fundamental things. That the life you've built rests on unexamined assumptions. That the person you believe yourself to be is largely a fiction assembled from fragments of other people's expectations. This confrontation is terrifying. It's far easier to remain on the surface, where the current of collective opinion carries you along without effort. Where you can mistake agreement for understanding and repetition for insight. Where you never have to face the existential vertigo of genuine uncertainty. Language itself has become an accomplice in this imprisonment. George Orwell recognized that when vocabulary contracts, thought contracts with it. If you lack the words to articulate subtle distinctions, those distinctions cease to exist in your awareness. Modern discourse has been deliberately flattened, reduced to binary oppositions and emotional reactions. Good or bad. Right or wrong. With us or against us. This linguistic poverty makes complex thought not just difficult but literally unthinkable. Meanwhile, your attention, the very resource required for deep thinking, is under constant siege. Every notification, every headline, every algorithmic recommendation is engineered to fragment your focus. The psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi demonstrated that deep thought requires sustained, uninterrupted attention. But sustained attention has become the rarest commodity in modern life. Your mind is kept perpetually busy yet never truly engaged, always processing but never penetrating. The trap is complete: education conditions you away from depth, society rewards shallowness, language constrains complexity, and distraction prevents the sustained attention that depth requires. You're not failing to think deeply. You're succeeding brilliantly at a system designed to keep you shallow. But recognizing the trap is the first step toward escaping it. And the consequences of remaining trapped are far more severe than most people realize. The cost of shallow thinking doesn't announce itself. It accumulates silently, invisibly, like interest on a debt you didn't know you'd taken on. You wake up one day and realize you've been living someone else's life, thinking someone else's thoughts, pursuing goals that were never truly yours. But by then, years have passed. Decades, perhaps. Here's what shallow thinking steals from you: meaning itself. When your thoughts never penetrate beyond the surface, life becomes a sequence of reactions rather than a coherent narrative. You're busy, endlessly busy, but there's a hollowness beneath the activity. You consume information without digesting it. You form opinions without examining them. You move through days that blur together because nothing is experienced deeply enough to leave a lasting impression. The neuroscience reveals something disturbing: your brain physically reshapes itself around your patterns of thought. When you repeatedly engage in shallow, reactive thinking, you strengthen those neural pathways while allowing deeper cognitive circuits to atrophy. William James intuited this over a century ago when he wrote that we become what we repeatedly do. Your mind is not a static entity, it's a dynamic system that reorganizes itself based on use. Shallow thinking doesn't just occupy your mind, it restructures it, making depth progressively more difficult to access. This manifests in your relationships in ways you probably don't recognize. Shallow thinking prevents genuine connection because connection requires understanding, and understanding requires depth. You have conversations that circle endlessly around the same topics, repeating the same patterns, because neither party ever goes deep enough to discover something new. You mistake familiarity for intimacy. You confuse time spent together with actual knowing. Carl Rogers observed that truly understanding another person, seeing them in their full complexity rather than as a simplified character in your narrative, is one of the most transformative experiences possible. But this kind of understanding is impossible from the shallows. There, people are reduced to types, categories, positions. Allies or enemies. Useful or obstacles. You never see the intricate web of experiences, fears, and contradictions that make them human. At the societal level, the consequences become catastrophic. Shallow thinking manifests as polarization that feels increasingly unbridgeable. Complex issues collapse into tribal slogans. Nuance disappears entirely. You're either with us or against us, and any attempt to introduce complexity is treated as betrayal. Hannah Arendt warned that this kind of thoughtlessness, this refusal to think deeply about implications and consequences, enables profound harm, not because people are evil, but because they've stopped examining what they're doing. There's also a temporal dimension to this loss. Shallow thinking traps you in perpetual presentism, constantly reacting to immediate stimuli without considering long-term patterns or consequences. You become unable to learn from history because you never think deeply enough about it to extract meaningful lessons. You repeat the same mistakes, personally and collectively, because the superficial analysis that identified them as mistakes never went deep enough to prevent recurrence. Perhaps most insidiously, shallow thinking creates the illusion of certainty while eroding actual understanding. You feel informed because you've consumed vast quantities of information. You feel confident because you can articulate positions on numerous topics. But this confidence is hollow. When pressed, when asked to defend your positions against sophisticated objections or to explain the reasoning that led you there, the structure collapses. You discover you don't actually understand what you thought you understood. The tragedy is that most people never make this discovery. They live their entire lives in this state of confident ignorance, never realizing how much deeper they could go, how much richer experience could be, how much more alive they could feel if they dared to think beyond the shallows. But there is a way out. And it begins with a kind of thinking that society has taught you to fear. The escape from shallow thinking begins with a single radical act. You must learn to observe your own mind as if it belonged to a stranger. Not to judge it, not to control it, but simply to watch it operate. This is harder than it sounds. Most people are so completely identified with their thoughts that the idea of observing them seems absurd. You are your thoughts, aren't you? No. You're not. Viktor Frankl discovered this truth in the most horrific laboratory imaginable, a Nazi concentration camp. There, stripped of everything, he found what he called the last of human freedoms, the space between stimulus and response. In that space lies the capacity to pause, to observe, to choose rather than simply react. This is where shallow thinking ends and genuine consciousness begins. Start here, for one full day, simply notice when you're repeating rather than thinking. Notice when you're defending rather than investigating. Notice when you're reacting rather than responding. Don't try to change anything yet. Just observe. You'll be shocked by what you discover. Most of your mental activity isn't thinking at all, it's rehearsed performance, automated defense, inherited script. The philosopher Socrates built his entire method on a deceptively simple practice, relentless questioning. Not questions designed to win arguments, but questions designed to expose assumptions. Why do you believe that? Where did that idea come from? Is it truly yours, or did you absorb it unconsciously? What evidence would change your mind? An unexamined life, he insisted, is not worth living. He wasn't being dramatic. He meant it literally. This practice is uncomfortable because it destabilizes certainty. You'll encounter contradictions in your own thinking. You'll discover that beliefs you held passionately rest on foundations you can't articulate. This discomfort is not failure, it's the first sign that you're actually thinking rather than merely remembering. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about those rare individuals who create their own values rather than inheriting them from society. This doesn't mean rejecting everything arbitrarily. It means examining everything thoroughly. Taking apart the machinery of your beliefs to understand how it works, then consciously deciding which parts to keep and which to discard. This requires tremendous courage because it means accepting responsibility for your own consciousness. The next level demands something counterintuitive. You must learn to hold paradox without collapsing into simplification. Shallow thinking cannot tolerate contradiction, it immediately resolves tension by choosing one side or the other. Deep thinking recognizes that opposing ideas can both contain truth. Reality is complex. Human beings are contradictory. The greatest insights often emerge not from choosing between opposites but from understanding how they're interconnected. Soren Kierkegaard observed that anxiety arises not from ignorance but from awareness of possibility. The more deeply you think, the more possibilities you see. This multiplicity can feel paralyzing at first. You're accustomed to the false confidence of shallow certainty. Genuine depth introduces legitimate doubt. But this doubt is not weakness, it's intellectual honesty. As Bertrand Russell noted, the trouble with the world is that fools are so certain while the wise are full of doubt. Practically, this means creating space for depth in a world designed to prevent it. You must guard your attention as if your life depends on it, because it does. This means deliberately choosing silence over constant stimulation. It means sitting with difficult questions without immediately seeking answers. It means reading slowly, thinking carefully, and resisting the compulsion to have an instant opinion about everything. The individuals who changed history, who genuinely thought differently rather than merely thinking faster, all shared this quality: they were willing to be alone with their thoughts, to sit in uncertainty, to question what everyone else accepted. Galileo, Darwin, Einstein. Not because they were smarter, but because they were willing to go deeper. That same depth is available to you. The question is whether you're willing to endure the discomfort required to reach it. Here is the truth that changes everything, the insight that makes all previous struggles suddenly comprehensible. At the highest level of thought, you discover that thinking itself is not the destination, it's the preparation for something far more profound. Most people spend their lives accumulating thoughts like possessions, building elaborate mental structures they mistake for understanding. They collect opinions, master arguments, develop sophisticated frameworks for interpreting reality. And all of this remains shallow because it never transcends the fundamental illusion that you are separate from what you're thinking about. Deep thinking, truly deep thinking, eventually reveals its own limitations. It shows you that there comes a point where analysis must give way to direct experience, where understanding must be lived rather than endlessly examined. The Zen masters understood this when they warned that words and concepts are fingers pointing at the moon, not the moon itself. You can study descriptions of water forever, but until you drink, you don't actually know what water is. This is not anti-intellectual mysticism. It's the recognition that thought is a tool, and like any tool, it has appropriate uses and inherent limitations. A hammer is magnificent for driving nails but useless for painting portraits. Thought is magnificent for analysis, planning, and problem-solving, but it cannot capture the totality of existence. When you try to think your way to complete understanding, you're like someone trying to use a map to experience the territory itself. The transformation happens when you stop identifying completely with your thoughts and emotions and begin to observe them as phenomena arising within a larger field of awareness. Instead of being the anger, the fear, the desire, you become the space in which these experiences occur. This shift is subtle but revolutionary. Suddenly, you're no longer at the mercy of every passing mental state. You can feel something intensely without being controlled by it. You can think something without immediately believing it. Baruch Spinoza called this true freedom, understanding the forces that shape you so completely that you're no longer unconsciously controlled by them. When you see clearly how your thoughts arise from conditioning, how your emotions follow predictable patterns, how your reactions are shaped by past experiences, something miraculous happens: the compulsion dissolves. Not through suppression or denial, but through understanding so deep it transforms the very structure of consciousness. At this level, beliefs are recognized for what they actually are: interpretations, not facts. Constructions shaped by experience, culture, and trauma. This realization is destabilizing at first because it dismantles certainty. But it's also profoundly liberating. When you see that beliefs are constructions, they become revisable. Growth becomes possible. Identity becomes fluid rather than rigid. You're no longer imprisoned by who you were or what you once thought. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught that people are disturbed not by things themselves but by the views they take of them. This isn't positive thinking or denial, it's recognition of a profound truth about consciousness. The meaning you assign to events determines your experience far more than the events themselves. Deep thinking exposes these interpretive layers, allowing you to respond rather than react, to choose meaning rather than collapse into victimhood. As this understanding matures, something unexpected emerges: gratitude. Not forced positivity or spiritual bypassing, but genuine appreciation born from perspective. When you understand the fragility of existence, the improbability of consciousness, the sheer unlikelihood of being alive and aware at all, entitlement fades. You realize that every moment of genuine presence is a gift, every instance of clear seeing a minor miracle. This shift transforms how you relate to time. Shallow thinking is trapped in perpetual urgency, always racing towards some future moment when life will finally begin. Deep thinking reveals that life is only ever happening now. Not as a cliché, but as an observable fact. The past exists only as memory. The future exists only as imagination. All experience occurs in this present moment. Missing it while lost in thought is missing life itself. Viktor Frankl observed that fulfillment arises not from pursuing happiness directly but from dedicating oneself to something meaningful beyond the self. This is where depth naturally leads, toward self-transcendence. The individual no longer centers every experience around personal validation or threat. There's a shift from ego-centered thinking to meaning-centered being. Questions change from, what can I get, to, what can I give? From, how does this affect me, to, what does this situation require? But here's the final paradox, the truth that completes the circle. Deep thinking ultimately reveals that the highest wisdom is learning when not to think. There's a place for rigorous analysis, careful reasoning, and sustained contemplation. But there's also a place for direct engagement with reality unmediated by constant mental commentary. The truly wise don't think less, they think better, and they know when thinking is the appropriate response and when it's simply a barrier to presence. Blaise Pascal wrote that most of humanity's problems stem from the inability to sit quietly in a room alone. In that silence, the compulsive machinery of thought finally slows. The endless internal narration quiets. And in that quiet, something deeper emerges, not as mystical revelation but as integrated intelligence. Intuition sharpens, not as fantasy but as pattern recognition refined through experience, reflection, and awareness. This is where peace emerges. Not as escape from difficulty or avoidance of complexity, but as alignment between your inner state and external reality. You stop fighting against what is. You stop clinging desperately to how things should be. You engage fully with what's actually happening, responding with clarity rather than reacting from conditioning. Society will continue its shallow patterns. Most people will remain trapped in reactive thinking, borrowed opinions, and inherited beliefs. This isn't cynicism, it's recognition. The systems that benefit from shallow thinking are powerful and self-reinforcing. But each individual who chooses depth creates a small rupture in that pattern. Depth is contagious in quiet ways. It changes how you speak, listen, choose, and live. Others sense it. Conversations shift. Questions deepen. Possibilities expand. The ultimate realization is this: you are not merely a product of circumstances, genetics, and conditioning. You are also a participant in your own becoming. Thought, when used consciously, becomes a tool for liberation rather than another form of imprisonment. But it only becomes liberating when you recognize both its power and its limits. The highest levels of thought teach you to think deeply when depth is needed and to transcend thought entirely when presence is required. To know which is which, that is wisdom. And wisdom, unlike intelligence, cannot be taught. It can only be discovered through the courageous act of looking directly at reality without the protective filter of comfortable illusions. So ask yourself one final question and sit with it in silence: if the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your consciousness, and the quality of your consciousness is shaped by how deeply you're willing to look, what level of seeing are you choosing right now? The answer isn't found in thought. It's found in the space where thought ends and awareness begins. That space has always been there, waiting. You've simply been too busy thinking to notice it. Until now.